Should Sir Keir Starmer tell Donald Trump that he's just gone too far now? The US president has put all military aid to Ukraine on hold after his explosive meeting with Zelensky on Friday, where Trump told Zelensky that he should be more thankful for the US's support. Now, we've not heard anything from the Prime Minister yet, but he has tweeted about something else, which means he's awake, he's aware. He's just not said anything yet. So should he tell Trump that he's gone too far? Get your calls in for this one now. Paula, do you think that he should go as far as to outright say, Trump, this is one step too far?
So this is really interesting because as far as I'm concerned, the simple answer is yes. He not only should he tell him, he's got to tell him. And then we take a step back and we try and take the emotion out of it. And we all know that making peace is far harder than making war. And we also understand how important diplomacy is in the act of ensuring that we attain peace and maintain that peace, Storm. And what do we have here? Well, we have, as far as I'm concerned, in Keir Starmer, a strong leader. And we have backing him what I consider to be the Holy Trinity. So we have Keir Starmer, we have a fantastic Foreign Office, and we have the King. The three of them showed us on a world stage last week how to get things done diplomatically to ensure that us as a country are not left behind. And hopefully, as we keep being told, to bridge that gap of peace. But in attaining that peace, Storm, we've got to have some tough talk.
OK. Geoff, do you think it would be appropriate? Would it be politically smart to tell Trump that he's gone too far?
I think that's the point, is politically smart, whether it is or not. And yeah, those conversations could potentially happen away from public view. But it's a subjective view on another leader's sort of internal policy. And I don't think that's the area that you can potentially be in. It's not for him to say whether or not that is a mistake. That's American policy. Personally, I'm distraught about it. But that is not necessarily the thing that Starmer could do publicly. But at this point in time, it is really quite important, given how estranged Trump is from the idea of Europe and a lot of European leaders, that there is one leader that seems to have some sort of footpath to Washington or some sort of relationship there. You know, Starmer did get a lot of credit for the trip that he had. And
what's your view on how Keir Starmer dealt with Trump on that visit?
Well, look, I mean, he just said really nice things to him and gave him a letter and he offered him a holiday.
But
so, you know,
is that what Zelensky should have done?
Not necessarily. They're very different leaders. They can operate in different ways. But Starmer took a lot of credit for that. He says, you know, people have called him the Trump whisperer and said that he's got the ear of Trump. Well, it's I just saw his ear. Sorry, but it is. It's the time to say, what does that mean? What does that mean to have the ear of Trump? Is there any dividend to that? It would be good to see some evidence of it, because ever since that meeting with Keir Starmer last week, every single thing that's happened after that is the opposite of what the UK wants. So it's time for Starmer to practice some really kind of away from public view diplomacy.
And that's sort of what he's already doing, is he not, Paula? I mean, he is talking to Europe. He is letting Zelensky know that we will be there for them. Zelensky met King Charles before the second state visit. Are we doing it? Are we making a covert statement rather than an overt statement? And actually, when it comes to politics and when it comes to Trump particularly, is that not the smarter move?
Oh, and completely. And I think, oh, my gosh, Storm, I am so relieved, actually. I am so relieved that the adult has now entered the room. And we've seen that with Keir Starmer.
So hold on, what room has Keir Starmer entered? Because that's what we're asking now.
Yes.
Has he entered into the discussions about where we stand with Ukraine and what we need to be doing with Ukraine?
Yes, it's a world stage, isn't it? That is our room at the moment. And I appreciate that there are domestic issues that so many members of society have and want to be able to raise complaints about. We know about our farmers, we know about our pensioners, etc. But in terms of that room being the world stage, we have an adult who is there representing us. And that is so important, because what we clearly don't have is somebody who says that they are a special friend to us. There are no special friends anymore that exist in terms of America. What we have is somebody who is essentially batting for the other side. And I think we need to wake up to that.
I mean, you know, you talk about whether or not he should tell him he's gone too far. I mean, something that a lot of viewers will have seen this morning in terms of going too far is Vice President Vance, who in this interview, you know, talking about the possibility of French and UK troops being on the ground, made a very dismissive comment about, you know, something about a foreign country that hasn't even fought in a war for 20 years. I think that potentially is an area where Starmer could say something because he's got to show some strength at some point.
I think we've got that very clip that you're talking about. This is JD Vance and his comments on, I think, the UK.
That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years. The security guarantee and also the economic guarantee for Ukraine is to rebuild the country and ensure that America has a long-term interest. You're not going to do that if you come to the Oval Office, insult the president, and refuse to follow his plan for peace.
So I think we're the random country, and the statement about not being to war for 30 years is clearly inaccurate.
Well, I'm sure he's going to row it back at some point and say it was about a coalition of other European countries. But the point here is he's the vice president. So if that's the case, then choose those words, make that point, because there's a lot of...
That doesn't seem to be very important in American politics at the
not
moment,
to JD Vance,
the right words or be accurate.
Well, JD Vance also is manoeuvring for a space on the world stage. He's looking at the succession. And, you know, there's this state visit for Trump. I think there's a lot of ex-British Scotties that served in Iraq and Afghanistan that would love JD Vance to come over on the next visit. They'd love to say hello to the guy, meet him and share a few words.
I'm sure JD Vance won't be doing that. Gwen from Kerrydiggy, you're first on the line. Do give us a call, 0207 862 2222. Do you think that Keir Starmer should actually take a stance, quite an overt stance, with Trump and say, listen, you have gone too far now? Gwen, what do you think?
I think he should.
Do you think that would be a politically smart move, considering Trump isn't the best at taking constructive criticism?
I'm afraid it's time he was treated just like he behaved.
Well, that would be interesting. What do you think the consequences to that would be? Do you think he would...
No one stands up to Trump. He's like a petulant child. And it's time that Starmer started to say and treat the Ukraine as a proper ally. And it's time the whole of Europe backed the Ukraine against Trump, because he's a showman and he and Vance together are quite dangerous. And who knows what original deal he made when he was speaking with the Russian, with Putin. And we don't know what his hidden agenda is. And we've no clue as to what they've agreed on.
No,
we bombarded the poor Ukrainian president with no respect whatsoever was appalling. So it's time that Starmer showed up and stood for what we, the British, stand for, which we should have our loyalty to the Ukrainians.
And I think Sir Keir Starmer would say that he has shown that to Ukraine. Whether we have any sort of standing in telling America what to do, not to use Trump's words completely verbatim, but doesn't America hold all the cards here? You know, what cards do we hold in telling America what they shouldn't do with regards to foreign policy?
Well, I have to say, I don't agree with this so-called special relationship. It's all in the air. They would turn against us at the drop of a hat, regardless of anything in the past. We have to look after ourselves, and we have to look after the rest of Europe, really. We managed before without America. Okay, they came into the war when they were actually in World War II, when the Japanese got involved. But other than that, you cannot rely on Trump's word. I'm sorry, I have no faith in his credibility whatsoever.
I don't disagree with a lot of what's being said there, but if you just war game what happens, so Keir Starmer comes out and publicly says Donald Trump's gone too far. What is Donald Trump going to do? He's going to unleash the gates of hell on Starmer. There'll probably be trade tariffs as well. That will push him further into this seeming alliance, or certainly empathy with the Russian position. So if the ultimate goal is to bring this war to a quicker close than it otherwise would have happened, some sort of line of communication and influence with the States is probably now the single most important thing.
All right, I'm just going to go back to our call here. Veronica from Hertfordshire, what's your thoughts on this?
Yes, well, I think it's a tricky business, because I think that when you're dealing with a petulant toddler, which is, as I see him, President Trump, it's difficult to deal with, but I think it has to be said. But the trouble is, as he's a wheeler dealer, not a proper politician, in my view, he could get very aggressive. And I agree. I don't think the special relationship has any meaning for him whatsoever. I don't think he cares. I couldn't think he cares less about us. He cares about wheeling and dealing. And I think he's appalling. And the way he treated Zelensky was absolutely appalling, to treat him like that when his whole country's been totally decimated.
Veronica, it's certainly not what we're used to seeing politicians, or how we're used to seeing politicians behave, but maybe that's exactly what the American public are after. I mean, I don't know. But what about the calls for people to stand up to Trump? What about the calls to say, when there is a bully, the bully needs to be stood up to? You can't just let the bully march all over, because basically what Trump is saying now is that I will, as a president, quite happily give some of your land away, and I have the power to do it.
Exactly, it's appalling. It's totally wrong. So he does need somebody to stand up for him, but I think we might pay a big price for it, that's all.
OK, Veronica, thank you very much for your call. Donald from North Yorkshire, do you think that's true? We're going to pay a big price for it if we were to tell him really how we felt?
I think you would. One thing I would think is worth mentioning or pointing out to Trump, that if he backs Putin and Putin takes over Ukraine, they're going to claim all of the minerals that Trump is after, and he won't get them.
He'll know that. He will know that.
That's for himself.
I see what you're saying there, Donald. I'm sure it won't be the whole of Ukraine. I don't know what the negotiations are. Obviously, I'm not involved in those calls, and quite frankly, having seen it on TV, I'm glad I'm not. But there may be a part of Ukraine that they give up, and Trump will be in charge of that, and actually, Putin will be in charge of that, and Trump will do himself out of some essential minerals that he's after.
I think he wants that deal at the end of the day, because if everything that's happened with all the rage that we saw in the Oval Office, that deal is not off the table as things stand. What's changed is the military aid, right? The deal's still on the table.
The deal's still on the table, but what we know of that deal is that Trump isn't interested in a peace process. What Trump is interested in is getting a mineral deal, is getting American companies into Ukraine so that they can mine. That's all that Trump is interested in, that's the shame.
I do wonder whether Trump's also interested in stopping the war as far as he can say he did it, because it was one of his pledges going in. And what is he, 40-something days into it? 44 days. And he said he would do it in 24 hours. So he is a little bit late on his own timescale. Donald, thank you very much for your call. Christine from East Sussex, what's your view when it comes to Trump? How do we deal with him in this situation?
Well, I sat on my little green settee where I live in Bexhill-on-Sea, and I could not believe what that man Trump was doing. He's treating Volodymyr Zelensky like a little child, and the biggest scowl on his face, well, I want to do this, or I want to do that.
Yes.
All he is a bully.
It wasn't dignified, that's true. It wasn't a very dignified meeting, or what we're used to when political leaders meet. What does Keir Starmer do now, though? When you have an individual like Trump who deals with things in the way that Trump does, which we all knew before he became president again. It's not the first time we've seen him in the Oval Office. What do you think the best approach is for Keir Starmer?
The way Keir Starmer's got to be really careful. It could drag us into something where this country is actually in danger. Making decisions that is quite frightening.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Christine, thank you very much for your call. Dave from Cumbria, what's your view on this?
Well, I'd just like to say, Dom, the point is that I think, what has the Ukraine really got to do with us?
Well, they are...
What did Poland have to do with us?
Well, this is the point. But when Starmer talks about we in Britain, who's he talking about? Because 90% of this country would not pick a rifle up and go to the Ukraine.
But 90% of the country didn't do it in the Second World War either. You don't need more 10% of the country.
What's that got to do with it?
It's absolutely everything. You've made a point here. You made a point that a sovereign country that's been invaded by an aggressor, that we shouldn't somehow defend them. Historically, that's been something that conscientious world players have always done. You know, it's partly why we got involved in the Second World War. And if everybody, sorry, mate, go ahead.
Do you realise how many Ukrainians were involved that joined the German army during the Second World War?
And do you know why they did that?
Yeah,
because they were going to get shot otherwise. They were threatened.
Oh, no, no.
So, Dave, I'm getting the impression that you think we should just stay out of Ukraine at all, not send any aid, not send any peacekeepers there, no boots on the ground, certainly not, and no more money.
Well, what you're doing is, when Starmer's on about boots on the ground and all that, that's people's kids, that's people's sons and daughters
Dave.
going to a country that's nothing to do with it.
Dave, nobody wants that. Of course they don't. Nobody wants their son or daughter to get injured going across in the First World War or the Second World War. But it's difficult sometimes. If you just let me finish, mate, Dave. If you just let me finish, there are some moments where you could say that if we don't act now, we might have to act in the future. And if Russia encroach further across the European continent, it might take more boots on the ground. It's about taking. There's no easy decisions. It's just a decision that we have to think about at this point in time.
Dave, thank you very much for your call. I think you won't be the only one that feels that way, certainly. Nobody wants to see their sons and daughters on the front line of any war. OK, don't forget, later...